I'm joined today by my legal team, who have advised me that I am not to mention a certain game developer who may or may not have tried to sue 100 anonymous users on the internet this past weekend, and who may or may not have destroyed their own business in the process of doing so. I will not be mentioning said developer at all in the course of today's episode, which is about a different studio entirely, Wildcard Studio. There is no visual symbolism in this episode, there is no allusion to any other subject in this episode. We're talking about Wildcard Studio today for the long-anticipated, long-awaited episode on Ark Survival Evolved. Enjoy! Ark Survival Evolved was considered something of a jewel in Early Access's questionable crown. Certainly good enough that news of it coming to the Xbox One was a big deal. This crafting survival game had a devoted fan base, a mostly positive reception on Steam, and was generally considered one of those few precious examples of how to get Early Access right. A baseline quality, solid amount of content, frequent updates, Studio Wildcard had it going on. A cursory glance at Ark's Steam store page now, however, and you'd assume something totally different had happened. Its current user review status sits at mostly negative, the result of fan backlash following the release of Ark's Scorched Earth expansion pack. Unveiled on September 1st, this is a really timely episode, the expansion takes place in an all-new locale with its own biomes, weather effects, and creatures. It's got 50 new items, a special boss encounter, and a fresh feature that allows players to transfer progress across servers in order to play the base game and Scorched Earth in tandem. In short, it's an expansion pack, just like any other. The description I gave you is it's an expansion pack. There is one key difference, however, that marks it as its own special thing. Ark Survival Evolved is, of course, still in early access. The response to Scorched Earth's launch was perhaps not quite what Wildcard intended. Outraged at the idea of selling a completed $20 expansion pack for a game that's still in development, players furiously let their distaste be known. And really, the thinking behind their fury is difficult to argue against. Early Access's basic idea is that you buy a game in development, expecting your money to fund said development, while experiencing the changes as and when they happen. It's not difficult to see why such a customer would find it so galling to discover that the studio they put financial faith in to finish a game had been working away on a completely separate project to sell them. A common argument is that everything in Scorched Earth should have been included in the main game, since that's ostensibly what the studio's expected to work on right now. The legitimacy of that argument is more debatable, if only for the fact that many AAA big budget games get a free pass from most people, despite clear cases of offering as DLC or pre-order bonuses shit that once upon a time genuinely did get shipped as part of the core product. What should or shouldn't be in a base game is a complicated answer, and there are too many exceptions made for me to fully back the idea that Ark buyers have a basic right to everything in Scorched Earth. However, the question of whether or not Wildcard should be working on expansions while still trying to deliver on the original game's premise, now that's a worthwhile one. Ultimately, early access is like crowdfunding in that successful projects are fueled primarily by trust. Customers are putting in money up front for things with uncertain futures, more so even than pre-order hungry AAA games. These are games that might never even get out of beta, much less live up to all of one's expectations. A famous statistic shared in 2014 suggested a mere 25% of early access games ever actually release as finished titles. So any game hoping to be a success on the service, especially a game that grows a large fan base like Ark, has a ton of proving to do. In that regard, I can only come to the conclusion that Scorched Earth was, indeed, a bad move. There's no real arguing against that, really, considering the repercussions that were had. Now, it may only be a short-term blip. It's not like video game outrages are particularly long-lived unless you pull a real Randy, but right now it was simply not the right time to start selling expansions, now was it? It's not, how one says, a good look for any game in early access to start flogging DLC while the game people bought is yet to be completed. Even if you think Wildcard has a right to do it, even if you disagree with the outrage, it should at least be understandable why the context behind Scorched Earth's release leaves a sour taste. You'll note that my tone here is one of examination rather than outrage, a more objective take than my usual idealistic and cacophonous ranting. Truth of the matter is, despite me being inundated with requests to do this video, and people still wanting to see me tear Wildcard down even so far removed from the initial controversy, I must confess I'm just not that mad about it. This isn't a defense of the studio or the game, I'm not even a fan of Ark, and it's not like I don't get why people are pissed off, I just don't have the fire for this one. I think part of the reason why is because of how knee-deep in the early access muck I've gotten over the past few years. In terms of taking the piss with early access, Wildcard doesn't even rank in the middle when I recall the sleaziest and shittiest things witnessed on that minefield of a service. I mean, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Let's talk about games with almost no content, games claiming to be alpha builds but can't even qualify for pre-alpha. They're so thoroughly lacking in all but the most basic store-bought assets. These aren't so much unfinished as unstarted, and they're allowed to be sold on Steam with no minimum quality requirement because Valve conveniently washes its hands of the situation since we've got that fair warning about the nature of what the early access service means. There are developers who clearly see early access as a way to peddle broken amateur hour bullshit and escape criticism for it because it's not done yet. If you've seen any of my previous videos about early access, you'll know exactly how deep this well runs when we start examining the chancers and con merchants who see early access only as a get-rich-quick scheme, who took a promising idea and turned it into an exploited, saturated free-for-all that has lost almost all of its credibility, while those using the service as intended struggle to get noticed and trusted among the filth. In comparison, a developer making an expansion, possibly because it needs more money than it initially thought it did for various legal reasons, is hard to feel particularly furious about. What Wildcard did was clearly ill-advised given the backlash, and Wildcard should have been more communicative beforehand, and of course handled it better during the aftermath, but it wasn't underhanded, I don't think. I would probably be more harsh towards this whole thing if Ark itself was crap. While I've said I'm not much of a fan of it myself, I at least can see it's competently made, it's been updated regularly by a team that communicates with its users, and it looks like it'll most assuredly come out of early access, unlike the other 75% of games on the service. Had Scorched Earth come out for a game that was still lacking in content and just plain garbage, that would definitely be an insult, or, as annoyed gamers often love to say, a slap in the face to consumers. But that's the funny thing about this situation. Had an expansion been released for a really shit early access game, like Mortos, nobody would care. Would you care if Mortos had an expansion released for it? Of course not. You don't even know what Mortos is, because Mortos is shit. It was shit when it was called Undeads, and it's shit now. They've changed the name as if that'll hide how shit it is. Nobody gives a shit about games on early access that really make a mockery of the system. It's only because Ark cultivated a big fan base and has been retaining that fan base by continuing to work on the game and keep it updated that people are now furious and feel insulted. It's kind of a grim irony that, had Wildcard been a genuinely scummy studio from the beginning, very few people would currently care enough to accuse it of being scum now. We saw this happen with Darkest Dungeon too. The better a game is in early access, the harsher the response will be when it makes a misstep in the eyes of its community. You actually have to be on your best behaviour when you make a good game people like, because you'll be punished more than doubly for even slight fuck-ups, as opposed to known shitheads, who will get away with far more just because it's expected of them. A lot of people believe only perfection can come from the things they like, because, well, they like it, so clearly it must be perfect because they have perfect taste. So when they see a studio they're a fan of not live up to that ideal of the perfect game developer, they feel betrayed. Nobody feels betrayed by anything Mortos does, because Mortos is shit. This isn't to justify Wildcard Studios, who really did make the wrong move, but I will be so bold as to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the response to them has been unduly harsh. When one considers that the reason the backlash is so intense is only because Wildcard has, up until now, done pretty much almost everything right, everything an early access developer is supposed to do, I think one has to believe that forgiveness, not forgetfulness mind, but a measure of forgiveness, isn't unreasonable. They're not Electronic Arts, they're not Warner Brothers, they're not the 75%. They made the wrong call once. Now if they make it again in future, clearly they haven't learned. But to be a developer on Steam that won't learn lessons and will continue to drive customer goodwill down the toilet is to be a pretty amazing outlier. I mean, there are a lot of shitty devs out there, but Wildcard didn't start bad and get worse, and do so in such a spectacularly self-destructive fashion that people actually did take notice of it and not ignore it like they did with Mortos. I can't think of any developer like that off the top of my head, but I'd be shocked to discover a studio so terrible that even Steam would decide against selling their games. And it certainly isn't Wildcard, because it's not like Wildcard is the kind of studio to blame others for its problems and then, while those falsely accused others don't even mention their name, manage to tank their own business and drive their livelihoods into the ground, demonstrating how all this time it's been the sole architect of its downfall. It's not as if Wildcard has a history of dismissive and hostile behaviour towards its audience and then acts like the victimised party when the fight ends up completely backfiring on them. I mean, to really deserve the kind of contempt and loathing we're talking about here, Wildcard would have to be a litigious, obsessive, borderline creepy blowhard of a so-called company that hides behind behind threats and underhanded, intellectually dishonest, accusatory rhetoric to avoid the simple fact that it deserves all the criticism it's unquestionably earned. But outside of Cobra Studios, I can't think of a single developer that bad.
Is that Jimquisition is the worst game developer studio of the scene. And I, even though I cannot legally talk about them, I want to say that they are the biggest piece of shit that I've ever witnessed, and I'm glad they're getting everything that's going to them. And all that I want to say is thank God for it.
Can't breathe in this fucking thing. Anyway, time for some more fuck Konami news. That's all the news that's fit to make you say fuck Konami, if you hadn't heard. This time, we're talking about how the PC version of PES is shit compared to the console version of PES, because Konami, in all its wisdom, decided to put an inferior last-gen version of PES 2017 on Steam. What? Surely I'm talking about PES 2016! You know, like what Konami did last year, when Konami decided to upload an inferior last-gen version of PES 2016 to Steam in 2015. No. Konami did it again. Now, in Konami's defense, they warned customers beforehand that they were going to do it, but that's not really a defense, is it? Because everyone's still wondering why. I mean, we're still wondering why you did it last year, Konami. Why did you upload a PS3/Xbox 360 version of PES 2016 on the PC, while the PS4 and Xbox One got updated, visually standardized versions of the game? We still don't know why you made that ridiculous, boneheaded move. So for you to do it twice in a row is absolutely incomprehensible. Well, it would be incomprehensible were this not Konami, because Konami is Konami, and Konami is the worst. I mean, honest to God. I'm stunned. As incompetent and terrible as Konami is as a publisher, to make the same fuck up twice in a row, I mean, that's not incompetent, that's sheer contempt. That is contemptuous behaviour. I'm not so much astonished, although I am astonished, but I'm not so much astonished as I am just disgusted. Like, that's actually disgusting behaviour, Konami. Sort it out. Oh wait, no, sorry, you're too busy putting zombies in Metal Gear Solid. Not even real zombies, unicorn zombies, zombie corns, you goddamn bloody knobs! Fuck Konami. Oh, by the way,